look at this exchange. An internal auditor presents a finding marked highly severe, and the operating executive pushes the report right back across the table. When an auditor labels an issue critical and management dismisses it as business as usual, the disagreement is rarely about the underlying facts. The data is often accurate and the control failure real. The question is why mathematically sound audits face such consistent pushback from operational leaders. The dispute centers on the threshold of severity. The audit team and the executive team are using different sets of metrics to define what constitutes a business threat. This friction stems from a structural failure within the audit process itself, where the audit's grading scale is detached from the business's reality. The flaw lies in the absence of a mathematical link between the audit's observation rating criteria and the organization's overarching risk appetite. Conceptually, risk appetite is the predefined threshold of acceptable loss or operational deviation that a company is willing to tolerate. Without this predefined anchor, auditors rely on subjective guesswork to rate their findings, which turns every report into a negotiation. To resolve this misalignment, we deconstruct the auditing process through the lens of the COSO integrated framework. Restoring the objectivity of audit ratings requires tracing the process back through the framework to rebuild the mathematical link to risk appetite. This represents the COSO Internal Control Cube. We start on the front face, focusing on the risk assessment tier where risk tolerance is established. Emerging from this is the risk appetite card, which must mathematically interlock with the observation rating matrix. With this connection, a finding's severity is a precise measurement of how deeply a control failure penetrates the established risk boundary. Hardwiring the rating matrix to the risk assessment component replaces subjective opinions with objective measurements. Next, the top face of the cube dictates core business objectives: operations, reporting, and compliance. These gears shift and reconfigure as the business responds to new market data and changing economic conditions. Audit teams often ignore this movement, relying instead on static risk appetite templates, often borrowed from generic industry examples. This copy-paste approach treats risk as a one-time compliance checkbox, leaving the document to gather dust while the business environment evolves. This creates a data mismatch. Auditors end up measuring today's performance against parameters that the business has long since moved past. Evaluating dynamic objectives with a static risk card ensures that audit ratings will misalign with the priorities of the C-suite. The side face represents the organizational hierarchy. Assuming risk tolerance is one-size-fits-all is an error. A massive million-dollar risk threshold rests safely on the wide entity-level tier, but forced onto the narrow operating unit tier, the structure cracks and flashes red. A financial loss that causes a disaster at a remote plant might barely register as a low-impact rounding error at the corporate level. Applying corporate risk limits to localized units disorients the audit's focus and generates a high volume of false alarms. When risk thresholds are not localized, audit teams spend hundreds of hours investigating immaterial processes. This leads to false positives, where minor variances are escalated as critical issues, wasting the board's time on irrelevant data. More dangerous is the blind spot. While a magnifying glass focuses on an immaterial risk, a massive tidal wave of strategic risk builds up unnoticed. Systemic threats bypass detection when the rating matrix is calibrated to the wrong structural tier of the business. Customized, localized risk referencing is the method used to protect executive time and identify operational threats before they materialize. To deliver value, internal audit must utilize all three COSO dimensions simultaneously. This requires a synchronized approach. The risk appetite card must be dynamically updated, its internal risk block moving in synchronization with the shifting objectives on the top face. Risk thresholds must also be customized. The card scales to match the specific structural tier of the entity being audited. Finally, this customized card maps to the observation rating matrix before fieldwork begins to ensure objective results. When these dimensions are aligned, audit findings are no longer debated. They become actionable intelligence. Boards and C-suite executives can stop the cycle of guessing operational risk tolerance. When ratings are constantly contested, it suggests the audit is measuring against boundaries that management does not recognize as relevant. Management can resolve this by requiring localized risk referencing. This brings auditors and executives together to review a unified dashboard based on shared data. RiskVigilantBharat Bharat serves as the strategic partner to build these customized risk policies and align audit frameworks with business reality. Stop guessing your risk tolerance. Define your boundary by contacting RiskVigilantBharat Bharat to eliminate audit friction.